So we're in the second of the 7 I am sayings in John's Gospel. And can anyone remember the Greek from which we get the English I am? Ego eimi, yeah. Just think of eggs for breakfast, ego eimi. Why is it relevant that we know the Greek? It's not really. But I've watched and heard lots of sermons, and they always throw in some Greek. No, the ego eimi, I am, is in the Old Testament, that's what God calls himself. He says, I am. And so I spoke last week about, what did I speak about last week? My memory's gone. Bread. I do remember, I'm just checking everyone else did. I spoke about the bread of life, and that was, with each of these, there's something for us. But also as we look to the context and we see the original hearers who Jesus was speaking to, there's something shocking about each of these I am statements. And last week the shocking thing was, firstly, Jesus just saying I am and in identifying himself with God. But secondly, that he was talking about bread. And the Israelites feasted on bread in the desert, which was called, great, it was called manna. I only need to remember half a sermon because you can fill in the rest. It was great. What an audacity Jesus had to claim to be the bread of heaven. And so today is another one of these. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. I am the light of the world. If you've got a Bible, then John 8, and it's 12 to 20 that we're looking at. If you haven't got a Bible, there's Wi-Fi. The password is St.George, because we're really high-tech here. So look for the St. George network, find St. George, open BibleGateway.com on your phone or device, and you will be able to get to the Bible. Or bring one with you. Or you can use the Bibles in the pews. I want everyone to be looking at a Bible. The reason is because long after I've gone, and long after you've forgotten me, if you've etched some notes in your Bible, then you'll think, what was that one about light? And you'll come back and see it. So it's really valuable to be looking at the text. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the... Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Light is a fantastic metaphor, isn't it? I think so. I think light's a great metaphor. It's not that hard to work out what light means when Jesus talks about being light, because the opposite of light is, we know what light is. And this morning, we've been given some sunshine, and it's shining through our windows, which is absolutely glorious, unless you're trying to read the words on the screen, in which case it may not be so glorious. But we've got wonderful lights coming in through the windows. If they weren't on, we've got lights in the church which would keep us illuminated. And we've also got the lights up there, which if I look, I get almost blinded at, that shine down on the front area here so that we can see. So here we are this morning in a church bathed in light, thinking about Jesus who says, I am the light of the world. I am the light of the world. So what I want to do is firstly look at the context. So where was he in the scripture when this happened? Where does this take place, this conversation? And then I want to think a bit about light, and I want to finish with some application. Well, what does this mean for us? Because we can't just leave it as interesting history. It has a relevance today. And then after that, there will be an opportunity to come forward. You were handed on your way in a candle. And a little tea light. And you'll be invited to come forward and light a candle and leave it on the table at the front. And we'll also have a prayer ministry team available because you might like to respond to the sermon by asking for prayer. So that's what's going to happen today, just to give you a heads up so that when I say at the end what's going to happen, you won't look at me completely surprised. I know that these are the comfiest pews this side of the Rocky Mountains. But I'm trusting that you'll still be energized from our opening worship by the time we get to that, to come forward. I am the light of the world, said Jesus. Go back a chapter to John 7 and see where Jesus is. You don't need to read it all. If you've got a Pew Bible, it's got the headings. He's at the Feast of the Tabernacles. The Feast of the Tabernacles is a festival that celebrates God's provision. And probably today, if the Jewish community was celebrating God's provision with such a festival, it would go on for about a week. It would be bookended by 2 Sabbaths, probably. So they'll have one weekend of parties, then they'll kind of have some mini parties through the week, and then a massive party at the second end. It was a feast celebrating God's provision to God's people. And I'm going to read briefly from a commentary as to one of the things that took place at this festival. So there would be great candle lighting ceremonies that took place every night, except on the Sabbath. A passage from the Mishnah describes what these ceremonies were like. At the close of the first festival day of the feast, they went down to the court of the women, where they had made a great amendment. There were golden candlesticks there with 4 golden bowls at the top of them and 4 ladders to each candlestick. These must have been big candlesticks if there were 4 ladders going up there. And 4 youths of the priestly stock, isn't that a great phrase? 4 youths of the priestly stock, and in their hands jars of oil holding 120 logs, which they poured into all the bowls. My imagination grows crazy here we've got ladders, we've got people carrying oil and 128 logs. They made wicks from worn-out drawers and girdles of the priests, and with them they set the candlesticks alight. And there was not a courtyard in Jerusalem that did not reflect the light of Beth HaShubah. Wow. So here we have the Feast of the Tabernacles with this great ceremony of candle lighting and all these people going, and these are big candles we're talking, not like these little tea lights. Big candles, big lights that were seen from far away. So there they are with this great celebration. And Jesus has the audacity to come in and say, I am the light of the world. How do you think those people were feeling at Jesus? Shout out a word, go on, I dare you. How were they feeling? Angry? Confused? Annoyed? Maybe amused? Who does he think he is? And so that's what they say in verse 13. The Pharisees challenged him. Here you are appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. And what we see is now that the Pharisees and Jesus are having this conversation about who Jesus is. And he's really struggling. He's really struggling, it seems, from the next few verses to explain who he is. Why? Because they don't trust his own testimony. They want a witness. When I applied for a job here, I was asked for the details of my bishop, such that the bishop in England could be in touch with the bishop in Vancouver, because they didn't trust me. Because anyone could write and say, I'd like a job and I'm a priest. They wanted somebody who was a witness to say, yes, he really is. And that's what we're like as people, isn't it? If you're going to employ somebody in your workplace and you have a requirement that they meet a certain standard, you might expect that they've got a certificate that says, yes, they meet that standard. Wouldn't you? We don't necessarily trust people at their word. We want to see some evidence. When I did come and actually started the job, then they said, right, now we know that you'd got some, your bishop said you were fine, but we want to see the paperwork that actually proves that you do have the degree you say you have, and you were actually ordained. And so I presented the paperwork as the evidence that I am who I say I am. Sounds like a song. That I am who I say I am, and that I have evidence to prove it. How is Jesus going to prove that he is the Son of God? And we see him in this passage. I think it's quite fun. he seems to tie himself in knots in verse 16. If you have a look down at 16 with me, he's talking about judgment. He said, I judge no one. But then he says, verse 16, but if I do judge, my decisions are true because I am not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. I am one who testifies for myself. The other witness is the Father who sent me. We seem to have a problem, because Jesus is claiming to be God's son and saying the other witness of who I am is my Father's in heaven. And the Pharisees, they're not liking this at all. He then says to them, you do not know me or my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts near the place where the offerings were put, yet no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. Not everyone was going to accept the claim that Jesus made to be the light of the world. And the teaching of the rabbis would say that a testimony to oneself was not valid. Jesus' response completely confused them because they didn't know what to say. It's highly unlikely that they'd ever encountered somebody before who had claimed to be God and saying, that's my claim. And so this section ends with the Pharisees rejecting Jesus, thinking that he's dangerous, and yet no one seized him because his time had not yet come. That's the third of 9 references to Jesus' hour or time, which is a significant theme through John's Gospel. The first 3 references, and this is the third, indicate that his time has not yet come, and the last 6 indicate that his time or his hour has come. But this hour was determined by God and not by Jesus' opponent, says the commentator. So once again, therefore, the evangelist says, no one seized him because his time had not yet come. So here is Jesus having the audacity to claim to be the light of the world. He says, I am the light of the world. What are we to do with the light of the world? It says in verse 12 at the beginning, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life. As you know, I go running now and again, and when I lived in England, I used to run at night. I don't run at night here because there's animals. I mean, there's animals in England, but they're rats and badgers and foxes and things. But here, there's like real ones. So I don't run at night. That's my excuse anyway. I can't be bothered to run, so I'll just say, well, there might be a bear, so I can't run. But I'd run in England, and the thing is, when you run in the daytime and you can see, then if there's some brambles or bushes sticking out over the sidewalk, you can see them, and then you avoid them. But at night, it's quite difficult to do that. And I'd find myself running along, getting my clothes torn on the brambles that were kind of reaching out over to the sidewalk. There's such a difference, isn't there, between the daytime and the night? One of my grandmas used to do a lot of sewing, and often I'd go round and say, oh, could you sew this? And her typical response, if it was the evening, was, no, I can't, because it's dark. And I'd say, but you've got lights in your flat. And she had very bright lights. I mean, they were like 100-watt bulbs. You know, the old bulbs that Edison invented. Edison's original bulbs, you know. They weren't these LED things. They were really bright 100-watt bulbs. Like, why can't she sew? No, I can't, she said. It's too dark. I only sew when the sun's out, because she couldn't see clearly enough. There's a ginormous difference between the daylight and the light that we can create as mankind, humankind. And I think we have an interesting relationship with light as people. Because even now it's quite bright and I could quite easily stick my sunglasses on. That's better. Because I've got the lights up here, which is like being at the dentist, and then I've got the light over there. I can't really see you very well, but that doesn't matter. Now you're safe to fall asleep, and I won't know. But we do, don't we? We get into the light, and we have to cover our eyes because we can't stand the sun. I remember as a child being at school, and we would go on school trips to visit these kind of caves, like in Wales or somewhere. There were lots of caves, and we'd go into these old mines, and either on a railway or a boat or something underneath in these mines. And it was the summer, so it was probably 20 degrees outside, and it was always 10 degrees below ground. And then you get used to being in the darkness. Get used to being in the darkness. Then coming out into the light, it was like, whoa, it was hot, and there was the brightness of the light. As people, we can struggle with the light. So sometimes we use our sunglasses, and sometimes we just go all out and do this. I'm going to have to stand still now because I might fall over. You know, when you, sometimes children, I can't do it, I've got to take it off. Sometimes children will cover their eyes, won't they, and say that, you can't see me. You can't see me. I can see you. But they get confused, and they say, because I can't see you, you can't see me. Now, the reason I share each of those stories is because for all of us today, one or more of those will have a spiritual significance. When Jesus says, I am the light of the world, there will be things for each of us that we think, okay, I'm fine with the light in this area of my life, but I don't want the light of Christ to shine on this one. I don't want the light of Christ to shine on my finances. I don't want the light of Christ to shine on my relationships. I don't want the light of Christ to shine on my home life. I don't know what it is for you. I don't need to know. And so, the light of Christ, and in that the light of the world, presents a challenge for us. Because I think we both love the light and at times want to hide from it. Is that fair? We love it when the summer comes, most of us. We go and get down to the beach or the lake, we get our sunglasses on, we love the light. But sometimes it can get too much, too sunny, too hot, and we just have to go and hide away in our houses once again. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. When you walk in darkness, there are things that can come and get you. The bears, the coyotes, the cougars. The bicycles with no headlamps. The cars with no headlamps. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so in that verse, Jesus is both claiming once again to be God. God who created the light. And he's saying, follow me. Follow me. Follow the light. Allow the light to come into your life. Follow me. When I was 21, I went to Peru, as you do. It's not that far from here, it'd just be a day trip, but from England, it was a long way. People who actually know geography are going, hang on, isn't it about 12 hours from here? And you probably have to fly via Toronto. But anyway, it was a long way. It was the first time on a plane, and it was back in the days, I know I don't look that old, but it was back on the days when planes didn't have a computer in the seat back. Or maybe I was just flying with Delta who hadn't bothered to spend the money on them. But anyway, and it was one of these big screens, and there was a movie, at the front of the plane, and that was it. So I had no idea how far I was in, and I was like a little child, Are we nearly there yet? And I went. I didn't shout it out, but I went and found a member of cabin crew. I thought we must be nearly there, and I went and found somebody, and I said, "Are we nearly there?" And she said, "We've done 3 hours." And we've got another 5 to go, because we were going to Atlanta, and then from Atlanta down to Lima in Peru. And so there I am in Peru, and I heard this fantastic story, and I don't remember the name of the lake. But there was an emperor who had, this was before the Incas, I believe, or I don't think it was the Incas, but the Incas worshipped the sun. And this emperor, who I think was called Pachacamac, we'll call him that for now, and if I'm wrong, Google it and email me later and tell me I'm wrong. But I think he was called Pachacamac. And he watched the sun, because he worshipped the sun, rising on one side of the lake at the same time every day, near the equator, so it would be, and then setting on the other side of the lake every day. And they worshipped the sun. That's what they did in that time, in that culture. This is about 500 years ago. And he just observed that every day the sun rose in the same place and set in the same place. And so he said, I don't want to worship the sun anymore. I want to worship the one who put the sun in its place. I want to worship the one who created the sun and who set it to rise from this side of the lake and set on that. And so because of the way things were, he decreed that in the whole of that empire, that they would no longer worship the sun, but they would worship the one who set the sun in motion. And he said, and we're not going to give that creator, I'll use the word, we're not going to give that creator a name. We're not going to give it a name. Because that demeans, that diminishes, that reduces the size and scope and awesomeness of the Creator. We enjoy the sun in the sky, but we don't worship the sun. We worship the one who put the sun in the sky in the first place. How he did it, we can argue another time. But that God created somehow, and here we are. We worship the one who put the sun in motion. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. As the sun shines into our church this morning, so we need to let Jesus shine into our lives. Because when we want to do our sewing, or our woodwork, or our railroad modeling, or whatever arts and crafts we do, and we take our work into the light, we can have a much better sight of what we're doing. When we want to go for a run, or a walk, or a hike, we do it in the light. When we want to dress ourselves, we do it in the light, otherwise it goes wrong. There's an invitation to confession, which goes like this. It says, Christ, the light of the world, has come to dispel the darkness of our hearts. Jesus Christ is the light of the world. And each of us, in different ways, may want to respond to Christ as the light of the world by saying, I want more of this light in my life. I don't want to keep things hidden in darkness. We are not so much to be lights as to show people where the light switch is. We're to help people see that they need to let the light of God, the light of Christ, into their hearts. As we look at the world around us, conscious of stories we hear in the news of a shooting in the mosque in Christchurch? Do we need the light of Christ in our world? Conscious of the thousands and thousands of Christians who have been killed in various parts of Africa because of their Christian faith. Conscious of people of all faiths around the world who are persecuted for different reasons. We need the light of Christ in our world. We need to walk in that light. We need to follow the one who is the light. So in a moment, I invite you to bring your candle. The band are going to sing. They've got 3 songs. It may take longer, but they have 3 songs. I invite you to bring your candle, come and light it on one of the candles up here at the front, and leave it on the table. And you might do that particularly as a prayer. You might do that as a sign that you want to receive afresh the light of Christ in your life today. Then there's going to be a few of us. I'm going to be here with Bridget, and Nona and Alicia are going to be up the front as well. So if you would like to come for prayer ministry, prayer ministry is ministry just means kind of serving somebody. And so in prayer ministry, what we're doing is any kind of praying that you like. And that is to say, some people come forward because they have a bad leg and they would like healing for that leg. Some people will have something going on in their lives they want prayer for. Some people might say, actually, I really want to commit afresh today to make the choice to be a Christian. Or maybe for the first time, come forward for prayer. So we'll take time to do this. We need to follow the light of Christ. We need to let the light of Christ come into our lives. And I'll just throw this out there because we're in Lent, and we are doing this kind of reflection, that there might be some for whom spending a bit longer as a time of confession is something you'd like to do. If that is the case, I don't have one of those boxes that you see on the telly with a curtain, but I would be happy to meet for confession and use a very short liturgy that enables the chance to reflect on things we might want to say sorry for and be assured of God's forgiveness. So confession is available. You can get in touch with me and book a time for that. So I'll finish with a story before we sing. I was in Israel. It's back in a tunnel. In fact, it's Hezekiah's tunnel. So Hezekiah had built a tunnel to take, and it has water in right now, so you have to walk through it in flip-flops. Although my advice, if you ever go to Hezekiah's tunnel, is don't wear flip-flops, because I lost a flip-flop in Hezekiah's tunnel, and it was slightly awkward. Because it was low and it was dark, and it was completely dark. And we've got maybe some little torches or headlamps or something. But the leader at the front knew where he was going, and he'd got a big light to help lead the way. And we were all kind of following, almost in the darkness, but following the person who had a light. So there we were in darkness, following the one with the light. And then we were at a certain point, and we must have been near the end of the tunnel, and the leader said, "We're going to stop." And all of us are thinking, right, what's coming now? And obviously he'd done what he was about to do many times before, but it was one of the most profound experiences of going from darkness to light that I'd ever had. He said, who knows Amazing Grace? Well, we're a bunch of trainee priests on a theological trip to Israel, you know. None of us knew Amazing Grace. How does it start again? We were fine with verse 1, but verse 2, it was gone. But there we were, and we started singing Amazing Grace. And so we're singing, sing with me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. And as we got to about that point, we were out of the tunnel. And the brightness of the light was, and that was a bright sun, was shining on us. So my encouragement is that whatever the darkness, the tunnel, in whatever part of your life, relationships, money, family situation, work, some sin you're struggling with, whatever it is that is keeping you in that darkness, today, make the choice. Make the choice to give it to Christ, who says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Amen.